and Institute of Contemporary Art very objectionable. Would you, as dean, have approved a lecture equally offensive to the sensitivities of non-Christian religious groups? That's the end of the quote. In an interview with the campus newspaper, a student member of the lecture committee noted rightly that, and here we quote again, he was interested in providing a forum for the artist to speak in a place where he would not be restricted by censorship. End of quote. In short, the professor writing the original article says, in short, all offenses are equal, but some offenses are more equal than others. Simply stated, you may say anything you wish at most American universities about whites, males, heterosexuals, Catholics, Jews as Israelis or Jews as white Americans, members of the Unification Church, evangelical Protestants, and offend them as you will, as the least protected sensitivity in the land. You may not offend militant blacks, politicized Hispanics, radical feminists, or activist gays. From the left, you may call moderate blacks Oreos or Uncle Toms with impunity. That is social criticism, not harassment. You may equally abuse anti-feminist women as Barbie dolls or mall chicks or psychological captives with impunity. That is analysis, not stigmatization, that creates an offensive environment. You may tell white students whose parents died fighting for freedom that their mothers and fathers were, depending on the context, oppressors, racist, sexist, or baby killers. You may exhibit a cross in urine. If the issue is the sensibilities of white, male, heterosexuals, however vulnerable their egos, universities will talk about the perils of freedom, and indeed correctly so. And then he says, if the issue is the sensibilities of politically correct minorities, evangelicals and Moonies need not apply, he says. Universities will talk about the vulnerability of egos and the absurdity of an ahistorical definition of freedom. Now, that's a lot of words. I don't like to quote that much usually, but you needed to hear that. If you think when going to college that the college or the university is somehow neutral and objective and even-handed, you are really living in a fairy tale world. Double standards will be found galore on the college campus, inside and outside the classroom. You will find, particularly inside the classroom, a failure to be neutral and objective because the professor selectively considers those options which he thinks should be taken seriously. Selectively considers the evidence that he or she wants to put before you in terms of your required reading assignments. Neutrality is not practiced at the university, and we should have known as much because the Bible tells us quite clearly that the unbeliever has a very hostile mindset. The unbeliever is not even-handed and impartial in approaching the evidence about this world and man's place in this world and the nature of man and how we should live our lives. In Ephesians, the 4th chapter, Paul tells us that there are two very different mindsets that we encounter in this world, that of the believer and that of the unbeliever. In verse 17 of Ephesians 4, Paul says, "This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you no longer walk as the Gentiles also walk in the vanity of their mind." How do they walk? As open-minded, objective people wanting to discover the truth wherever it may be found? Absolutely not. They walk in the vanity of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardening of the heart. And then if you go down in your Bibles to verse 20, you notice what Paul says there, but. And this is a very important but. Those who are unbelievers, Gentiles in their mind, are openly hostile to everything that is holy and good. But you didn't so learn Jesus. That's not the way you became a Christian. That's not the way you live your life. He goes on to talk about a completely different mindset. In verse 22, he says, that you put away as concerning your former manner of life the old man that waxes corrupt after the lust of deceit, and that you become renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new man that after God has been created in righteousness and true holiness. But you haven't learned Jesus that way. Paul says you've rather put on the new man. You've discarded that old man that walked in the ways of the world, and you now think, you now feel, you now reason, you now choose, you now evaluate things in a completely different way. You've been renewed in the spirit of your mind after God, your Creator. You've been renewed in genuine holiness. And so there you have it. Paul tells us quite clearly there's no neutrality in this world. There are two quite clearly antagonistic, conflicting, systematically opposed mindsets.